Hey everyone. So today, as long as everybody agrees to behave, we will have class outside. It's February and it's 72 degrees, which is really unusual. So I thought rather than doing this in the garage bay and kind of moving them out, in and out, I'll go ahead and just do it side by side out front. And the people I'm concerned with behaving, so to speak, is traffic. You're going to hear some of that most likely. The sun, which is not out at the moment, and hopefully for video purposes it's really better if he stays away. And then wind. Now I have a wind sock on my mic here and hopefully that takes care of the wind. But other than that, if those three, and maybe rain, looks like it wasn't, I don't know if it's supposed to rain or not, but anyhow, all of those behave, we can have class outside. If they do not, we will have to go inside. Now, what are we doing today? Today, we are doing a bit of a power comparison, but not exactly. So this tractor is the one I've been prototyping everything on for the turbo. And at the end of this video, hang out because we're going to go through the final details of this turbo. Now, there's no hood on this, but don't worry about that. It all fits under the hood. And the reason there's not a hood on it is because the way Kubota's hood is, the way it goes up, we really don't have a whole lot of room, so it's just a lot easier to see if we keep the hood off of it. Now, I could have, kind of cleaned things up, all the oil I've spilled and other things, but I kind of just left it there along with the paint pen that didn't cooperate. So anyhow, we have our turbocharged HydrosPlus Turbo Plus for the Kubota BX. And again, I'm going to take you through kind of the final details at the end here. And then we've got our stock BX23S. Now, with the exception of just a few features, these tractors are identical in that, things like bracketry for the backhoe, the seat, the wider ROPS here, the quick attach on the front, and that's pretty much it. Other than that, they're the same tractor. Certainly the same engine, tuned in the same way. So the reason I have this tractor out is because I do need to get a baseline on it, because the installation video is going to be on it since it is completely untouched. Now this tractor has almost 1,100 hours on it, and I suspect has a little bit of blow-by. It definitely has a bit of a oil smell when it runs. And so, 1,000 hours on a diesel engine really isn't anything to worry about, with the exception of this tractor here has never actually seen a grease gun in real life. Of course, that would be with its other owners. We've added some grease since then, but I fear it may be too late. I don't know how many oil changes it's had. I don't think it's probably going to be enough. Now, this tractor has had a pretty easy life. See here, I think we don't even have 200 hours on it. The guy I bought it from, you can kind of tell those guys are kind of a little bit particular about their machinery. And I've been much rougher on it than he ever was, I'm sure. And I did just change the oil on it, but he did the requisite hours on the oil filter. So I feel pretty confident. And he also, when I bought it, he also gave me, even though it only had like 140 hours on it, he had already done a hydraulic change and he gave me some additional hydraulic oil, so I felt like he probably took pretty good care of it. That said, these are the ones that we're going to work with here. I've already done a baseline on this, but it's been just a bit ago, and it was when it was completely stock. And the baseline was a little bit funny in the numbers, in that Kubota says 17. The most I was able to squeak out of it with the power comparison apparatus, as we call it, even though it's a comparison apparatus, we have been able to get pretty close to the numbers expected on horsepower. So it really does a pretty decent job of operating as a dyno, but don't take those numbers, or the numbers you're going to see here, don't take them as the gospel, because we're really just comparing the tractor to itself. And that's what we care about, is what is the percentage gain, because maybe your tractor has 20 horsepower and this one only had 15, I don't know. And You know, does that mean that if this one gets 70%, yours is 70? Probably, but maybe not. You know, it could be a setting. I don't know for sure. But that said, the only variable we really don't know on this is what is the efficiency of that pump. If the efficiency of that pump is more or less than what we're assuming, which is about 80% efficient, then our numbers are going to vary based on that. But again, so far, all of the 1025s and the 1023s have been spot on. I will tell you the 2038 was pretty far under, similar to this. And honestly, my point of view on that is the 2038 really is under from the factory. But I don't want to argue with anybody on it. I'm just saying I'm not seeing that under number being something that I am trying to use as to question this. Really, this has more right answers than wrong answers based on what I've been able to do so far. The 3039R was spot on. So again, I'm going to mention horsepower numbers. They should be close, but they may not be exact. And I just want to make sure nobody goes to the dealership to buy something and try to, you know, say, well, this thing only has 15 horsepower, even though your stuff says 17, anything like that. Not that anybody would do that. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this tractor, and I've got both tractors run up, and I actually did go ahead and put this on while I was inside the shop and got the oil warmed up, but I will get the oil back up to temp here. It's already 70 to 72 degrees. Temp is generally anything over 100 Fahrenheit is considered up to temp on hydraulic fluid, so we don't have to worry about that too much today. So we're going to run this one. I'll get a baseline. We'll run this one. We'll get our HydrosPlus TurboPlus number, and then once we do that, I'll show you the numbers on the screen. And then, of course, here comes the wind. I knew if we had class outside that somebody was going to ruin it, but we'll probably end up taking it inside, and I'll show you the particulars of the TurboPlus for the Kubota BX. All right, while we're getting the oil, make sure it's up to temp, I'll go ahead and remind anybody who is not familiar with HydrosPlus or haven't seen one of these videos just yet, what we're actually doing here. We've got a hydraulic pump that at 540 RPMs produces, I believe it's 17 gallons a minute, but that's the only reason that is relevant is because we want to make sure that we can produce enough flow here that we can bring it down, and the correlation between our flow and pressure doesn't get our pressures up too high. So the principles on this are based on a known hydraulic flow and a known hydraulic pressure. We can determine how much power the pump would need in order to make those flows and pressure. So again, you could do this with a pump that is maybe 5 gallons a minute. We could actually do it with the pump on the tractor. So the pump on the tractor can achieve, let's say, 5 gallons per minute. But the problem is, for the 15 to 20 horsepower this tractor is going to make, we would have to push that pressure up to maybe as high as 5,000 PSI, because that's what it would take at that flow to bring this tractor down into the range where we can read it. So ultimately, that's why we're using this pump, and it's also why we would probably get a different horsepower reading that is somewhere between PTO and flywheel if we were using the pump that is actually on the tractor, because it's not exactly run off the PTO, but it's pretty close, and it's obviously not exactly the flywheel. So I think our temp is probably up here, and so what I've done in all of the previous is I've brought the tractor down, and over time I have changed the process just a little bit. I do want to make sure that, first of all, when we start it, we don't really have any pressure. So right now we're showing 70 PSI, but that's just residual pressure within the system. Well, just to be sure, just to be 100% sure. Yep, so we've got our unit tared, so it's zeroed out. And so I do want to make sure of that. We'll go ahead and get my PTO off. We'll go ahead and kick the PTO on. And so what you're seeing right now is 74, 75 PSI and 5, 6, 7, 8. And we can actually use that to calculate how much horsepower we're actually taking just to run this right now. As you can tell, when I take this out, I hope you can hear that, but the engine tone changes just slightly because there is some load on it, even though it's not very much. All right, so we've got this backed off completely, making sure we don't have any load on it. And then we're gonna bring it up, so we're almost at 20 gallons a minute. That's because we're actually faster than 540. But now that we're here, we see that we have about 500 PSI. We're gonna drag this down. And the way I do this test is 17 is 540, and I'll go ahead and bring it down to about 15. We see 15 there, and we're seeing about, we'll call that a 1500. I did see 1500 there, just there. And then actually I want to bring it back up here to 16 on this one. 16 yields about we'll call that 1400. And then I'm going to bring it back down to 15. So we're going to call that 15 to 1525. So what we have is at 15 gallons per minute, we had about 1500 PSI, and at 16 gallons a minute, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 1400 PSI. All right, I got my trusty calculator. So it's as simple as we went 15 gallons per minute, not very trusty today, times a 15, whoops, is this a back? It's the wrong direction. 1500, right? No, stop. So 15 times 1500. So 2250. And I'm going to times that by a coefficient. There's a couple ways to do this, but this is the one I use. It's 0.0007. That accounts for the 80% efficiency rate, and 15 3/4 is what we saw at 15. And that's about the number that we got for that tractor when it was stock. That's really the most I could squeak out of it. Now, I want to do this one just to make sure. Nope. 16 times 1400. So 22,400, I kind of know because I saw on this one is 15 times 1500 is 22,500. It's basically the same. So whether it's 6, you're between 15 and half and 15 3/4. That is on this stock tractor, and honestly, that agrees with what I saw on that tractor. Now, when I've run a number of 1025Rs, they have all been about 17 and a half, between 17 and a half and probably not quite 18, and that's what they claim. This tractor, well, it claims basically the same number. We're seeing it a little bit lower than on the John Deere, and that is also these tractors tend to kind of match up with the 1023E, which kind of makes sense. And this engine is a 1 liter, it's a 0.9 liter engine. Same thing for the 1023. A 1025 is actually a 1.2 liter engine, I believe. And obviously fuel and air and all those things make a difference. But again, I'm only saying this because that's what they claim. And this is what we're seeing. And if you compare with the same machine, the two tractors, this tractor tends to get the horsepower rating that the 1023 gets versus the 1025 having a couple of extra horsepower, at least in the stock form. So let me go ahead and switch over to this one and we'll see what we get on it. Okay, we got everything hooked up here and everything is the same. Before I started it, I did make sure that we were zeroed out. And as you can see, and as it would make sense, at about the same RPM, which is just idle, we're producing about 75 PSI. Now, this may be, now I do have a boost gauge on here that I'm going to look at as we're running, just because I'm curious, and I do have a boost gauge coming, but that's a longer story. Some of you may have heard me say that before a while back, and it's still not here, but this is what it is. Okay, so everything's warmed up. We're going to do the same procedure here. Yeah, I got those down. One thing to notice, at idle, this is a governed engine, of course, and I do need to go over the governor a little more for those who are less familiar, but at idle, we're really not producing any boost, and that's true for pretty much any turbocharged machine. But as we get up into wide open throttle, 3400, we're still only producing about 1.5 PSI boost. Now, that's because there's really no load on the machine, even though it's running it here. We're running 19 gallons per minute, and our clutch is about 600. But when I start to crank her down here, bring ourselves down to 15. Back up to 16 there, 24, 2516, 15, I get that, about 2400. Pull this down for boost. About 9 PSI. Come back up here at 16. Well, we kind of pegged it there. So we probably have more than 10 PSI boost. One-armed man here. But my meter only goes to 10 on this, so it looked like we had a little bit more. We'll let some oil circulate through the turbo here for just a second, and then we'll shut it off. Now, one thing I'm noticing about this Kubota specifically, and maybe other ones, likely other ones is what I would say, is I see more black smoke based on how I set the fuel screw. I can turn that fuel screw back in and kind of pull that black smoke back at wide open throttle, but I wanted to see, what was the max we could get. And I probably, we'll see how that works out. But what that means is that with the injection pump that we currently have and the factory plungers that are in there, we have more than ample fuel for the amount of boost we can create here. Now, 10 PSI, 11, 12, whatever it ended up being, I don't think it's much more than probably 11 or 12. But at that amount of boost, I don't really want to go further than that on this particular turbo setup, not because I'm necessarily worried about anything, but this is meant to be safe, reliable power for these tractors, and not something, we're not taking this to some kind of dyno competition or anything like that. I am thinking about and working at least a little bit on what would the next step be. Now, in this tractor, if we ended up with a larger turbo, we might have, depending on how much larger, we might have enough headroom, as you might say, in the injectors in order to not even have to get into the injection pump. But on the 1025, on the 1023, I feel very confident that in order to get more horsepower based on the amount of boost we can produce with this turbo, we would have to get into the injectors. That's not going to be comfortable for everybody, but it is definitely something that everybody could do. We'll just have to see if that comes to fruition. So let's go all the yammering here. Everybody wants to know if you've already done your calculation. Hopefully I did not forget. So it was 2,500 PSI at 15 gallons a minute is what I saw, which is 3750. What times that by 0.0007 equals 26 and a quarter. And then what was it? It was 16 gallons a minute times 2,400 PSI, and then that equals times 0.0007, 27 horsepower. Now, because we saw so much of that black smoke, one of the things I actually want to do, we're going to do one more pull on this, and I want to go ahead and just pull out the air filter, because one thing about both this and the 1023 from what I can see is this air filter element seems to be pretty small. Now, of course, for just this engine, probably not that big a deal, but I'm going to go ahead and put it here in the cup holder. Not there, cup holder here. I'm going to leave this off, and let's go ahead and start her up. We'll make one more pull out of. All right. Same deal here. Everything looks good. I'm basically just going to kind of tweak it. So already you're seeing 2 gallons or 2 pounds of boost, which means we're probably feeding it a little bit more air because we do have the same pressure here. So we'll just do a pull down to 15. That's what tells me that really this measurement needs to be for this tractor. I'll go back up to 17. We're losing it there. You got a 16 and pull the governor down. We'll let her idle down here just a little bit. Go ahead and shut off the PTO. We'll do, so I saw 2,600 at 16. Times that by 0.0007. 29.12. So, to me, and I still saw some black smoke, even when we pulled it down to 16. Now, as you pull it down below that and things start to kind of slow down and you can't have as much boost, and when you saw the actual pressures going down, meaning that the power really wasn't there to keep up with it, then, you know, that's a little bit, that kind of gives us the indication that we're actually producing, the curve is starting to go back down. But that's nearly 30 horsepower and at basically the same measurement that I did. Honestly, I got barely 15 on this one. That one we just saw 15 and a quarter. This one, I doubt it was 15 and a half. So you're looking at, if we gave it enough air, potentially, that we would have a almost 100% increase out of this engine. Now, keep in mind, this is not how we want to run this engine long term. The point of safe, reliable power is we're out mowing, you hit a big wet patch and you just blow through it. It bogs down for a couple seconds, and then you know, you're back up to your normal operating RPMs, you're good to go, and the governor is no longer engaged. Snow blowing is going to be one thing that's really going to make a big difference. This is from all of the John Deere people that are using the TurboPlus on snow blowers. Basically, the sentiment is you can't shove enough snow into the snow blower that I have in order to bog it down. I mean, I have to say that you don't hear the tone of the engine change, but basically as fast as you can shove it in, it's going to spit it out, which is a big deal, I think, especially in snowy conditions. And obviously it's not going to be 80 degrees outside. It's probably going to be as low as maybe negative 20 degrees, who knows, depending on, you know, where you are in the world. And so you could probably deal with a little bit longer pull and a little bit more temperature, since you know, you have those external temperatures being colder. So I'm going to put all this away and I will probably bring it in, but we'll decide. I want to show you some of the details of this setup and talk about when it's going to be available. All right, so I did say that I was going to go inside most likely, but it's so nice outside. It's February, over 70 degrees. Quite frankly, inside it's a little bit warm. And for the most part, the kids are behaving. The actual one that I didn't think about who joined us late is the local elementary school that's kind of across the way. There's a little bit of screaming over there, but I think it's going to be fine. I mean, you guys don't, I don't think anybody really expects like highly polished videos from me. Hopefully I have highly polished products and excellent service, but the videos, they're kind of a necessary evil in some of this. So we'll give this a shot, see what happens. Now, I'm going to go through the components, but we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty detail because there will be an install video very shortly as we put it on the BX23S and I show you the full, all the details of all the things you need to change to get the results that you just saw. Now, I will say, and this is always going to be true for any component, anything that I have like this, especially when there's a lot of parts, there are likely to be upgrades to some of the parts of this, and the one that I'm most thinking about is going to be where the oil returns back to the machine, and possibly where we get the oil from the turbo, the waste oil from the turbo, because I've been through a couple of iterations of what this is going to be, and I'll talk through those just so you have an idea. But ultimately, those parts could be upgraded, and if they are upgraded, you are entitled, if you buy this, you're entitled to those for free. Just let me know. I will let you know that they're available, and then you know, if you want them, they're not going to be functionally different most likely, and most people probably aren't going to want them because that's just something else you got to change. But if you want it, you certainly can have it. Now, let's go ahead and start with the meat here, the turbo. Turbo is the exact same turbo that we use on the HydrosPlus TurboPlus for the 1025, the 2025 second gen, and it's likely to be the turbo that we use for the 3E series. And for the most part, anything that's kind of a 3-cylinder engine in the 1 to 2 liter range, that turbo is going to be more than sufficient for what we are looking for, right? Again, safe, reliable power. You'll hear me say that often because we're not trying to blow the lid off this thing. We're trying to make sure that when we go out to blow snow and we got more snow than overnight than we thought, we can actually get the job done without having to spend all day doing it. Now, turbos also, I won't get into this in deep detail, but there's a lot of talk and different things about how one turbo is better than the other. For the most part, until you get into the very high level minutia of racing or certain things that you want out of it, a turbo for the most part is a turbo. As long as you have enough exhaust gas to spin it up and you can create the pressure, which this is appropriately sized for this size of engine, then that's all you care about. If you go and put the turbo off a Duramax on here, you're not even going to be able to spin it enough to create any pressure, so that's why we don't go that big. But also if you get too small, what you end up with is creating some restriction that doesn't hurt anything for the most part. It's just you're not going to create the amount of power that you might want to create. So this turbo is virtually the same turbo that all the Yanmar, John Deere Yanmars, including Yanmars on marine applications and other things like that. That is basically the same turbo, area of radius, the exhaust exits, those types of things, very similar. So that's the turbo we'll use for this. Will we have something bigger in the future? I think it's likely. Now, I mention that because if you buy this turbo and some point in the future I come out with a turbo 2.0, you will be able to upgrade for the same price or less than what people buying it at the very, when it actually comes out is. Now, there's some inflation things and how long is it going to take, and we'll work those out. But what I can tell you is you won't be disappointed or frustrated with the difference in cost, because I'm going to make sure that's fair. The people who buy my stuff now, they are the ones who actually fund all the new cool stuff that comes later. And if you do that, you should not be punished for buying something early. You should be basically incentivized to buy it early so that we can get those cooler toys. And if you decide you want them, you can have them. So turbo, it's enough about the turbo. We have a custom charge tube, as we would call it, comes down into the intake. Previously you had this, actually it comes from here, not here. It comes from here, it's got some type of chamber on it, and it goes to there. Now, one of the things that will be a little bit different on this machine than on the 1025 or the 1 series, I'll just refer to it as that, is the way that we vent crankcase pressure back into the intake. We're actually going to cap this off on the intake, and then we're going to vent that crankcase pressure back into the intake stream, and it'll go back through the engine. If you decided you wanted to, you could also add a catch can and vent it to atmosphere after the catch can. Up to you. This is the way we're going to do it. It's actually more efficient. There may be a little bit of oil vapor in there, which doesn't hurt anything. It actually just increases the amount of potential power you have and lubricates the compressor side of your turbo. Now, of course, if you've been following along, you'll know this is our custom manifold. And unfortunately, at this point, I can only confirm that it works on the 23S. I think it's likely to work on the 1880, but it will not work on the 2680. And the irony of the fact that people who bought the bigger machine and now they don't have access to a turbo that is coming out right now is not lost on me. But I think I've had enough feedback at this point that I can confidently go back and create a new manifold for this, and I know that I can recoup the cost, and all will be well. The only downside to it at this moment is that you will not get it when this comes out. It's probably going to be a couple of months after that. Now, I'm hoping that what I have to confirm, what the difference is, notice that the exhaust flange goes this way, and this one turns and goes the other way. On the, it's a D1105, I think. This is a D902, and it's a D1005, something to that effect. It's basically 100 cc's more of an engine, but they all go the same direction on the 2680 versus this one. It's two one way and one the other way. I don't know if that was to kind of avoid something, or I'm sure there was a reason for that. I just don't know what it is. So 2680 come a little bit later, but we have this custom manifold that holds your turbo up here directly in line with your intake air box here, which again, it doesn't go down, doesn't have the chamber, it just goes directly in. It's a very short path, which is good, but as you saw earlier, there could be some improvements potentially made on airflow. Now, I don't typically want to tweak with that, at least at this point on this type of application, but later on, again, we may do something a little different that's going to get us a little more air so that we can create a little more power if we decide we want to do that. So we've got this custom manifold. So far we've got the intake custom manifold into this turbo, into the charge tube, and of course we've got to get the exhaust out of the machine. The beauty in this exhaust is that it exits exactly where the factory one does. So no changes there, no changes to the cowling. You're still going to have black soot that ends up on your loader most likely, because on an engine like this, it's mechanically injected. The governor, as you start it and you shut it off, it is not operating in the way that it does when it runs. And so you're going to have that black soot on startup every time, and certain situations in between. So we've got our feed line here that goes down to a custom T that goes into where the original oil pressure sending unit was. That sending unit is going to go into the T. So we come up here, we do have our hose end that is a banjo fitting and a banjo nut there to make sure that it's oiled. And then from there, we come in, oil comes out through a custom fitting here, down into basically the bottom of the injector pump. On the other side of that, if you actually open the inspection plate, what you have there is an inspection plate today. We're going to utilize that to get the oil back into the crankcase. Now originally, there was two ways that I had planned on handling this, and this ended up being better overall because of the plumbing, but I actually built a custom plate here, and I wanted to send, and with this, it actually had to keep the oil from going into this exit tube here, which I don't have a clamp on, but that I will eventually have a clamp, but also accept it back into the valve cover. Well, it turns out at high RPMs, with the amount of oil that we were sending through the turbo, there is a baffle in there, and it just couldn't ingest it. So we ended up getting some smoke at higher RPMs in certain running conditions. So we abandoned that. We could go into the oil cap here, which would be okay, because you don't add oil to these tractors that often. When you did, you would have to take it off and deal with the tube that went into the oil cap. But what I found is, even if we were willing to do that, the hose ended up being so kind of short and hard to deal with that I didn't like it. So we went with the last option here, coming down into the bottom of the injection pump. Oil already goes through there, and honestly, if you look at the John Deere or the Yanmar, it basically has the oil filler cap is in the same spot. It goes into the injection pump so that you can fill the oil there, and that's how we actually run it through on the HydrosPlus Turbo Plus for that machine. So it kind of makes sense to go ahead and do it here. It's a direct path into the bottom end of the engine. So that's it in a nutshell. More to come very soon. And your last question, if you've hung out this long, is when can I get it? Now this is February 2025, and the only thing that I'm waiting on is the final production run of these exhaust manifolds, and those should be arriving to me in hopefully early March. I'm going to say March. That way, when you come at me and I say, you go, I thought it was early March, I'm going to say, no, I said March. And then when you come and say, I thought it was March, I say, no, it's March, can be late March. And you know, I gotta make sure I have my excuses teed up just in case it doesn't work out. But actually, I feel very confident on this. And yours will look a little bit different. You're going to have a high temp powder coat on that's black, that will eventually burn off. I could have just left them plain. This is going to be plain, and if you leave it out into the elements, it will rust, but of course, that's not going to hurt anything. So I thank you for staying this long. I hope you guys are as excited as I am. This thing produced almost 30 horsepower. I'm pretty stoked about that. This is a direct injected engine. The 1 Series are indirect injected engines. Generally, we get more compression and horsepower of a direct injected engine. Maybe that's it, but we'll do a little bit more testing and see if we can figure out what the difference is, and you know, if there's more to be gotten from this machine. Questions, comments, leave them below, and thanks for watching.